Welcome, everyone. Today we're diving into the story behind a real icon. You know the cars, that three-pointed star. It means luxury, engineering excellence. But how did Mercedes-Benz actually get to be, well, Mercedes-Benz? We've gathered quite a bit of information, research, historical accounts, you name it, to piece together this pretty amazing journey for you. From like the very first glimmer of an idea all the way through some really complex moments in history. We're aiming to pull out the key turning points, the stuff that really shaped this global brand.
Yeah, our goal here is to really unpack that whole journey. It's definitely a story of innovation. I mean, relentless innovation, overcoming huge skepticism, these big visionary leaps.
Right.
But it's also, and this is important, a story about facing some incredibly difficult ethical challenges along the way. We'll dig into the insights from the material we have, show you it's way more than just how a car evolved. It's about sheer determination, struggle, and, how history inevitably leaves its mark.
And you can expect some moments that might just make you rethink things a bit. We go from this determined engineer, basically starting with nothing, tinkering away, all the way to a company getting deeply and, frankly, troublingly tangled up in a really dark period of history.
Yeah.
But also, somehow, that core drive for innovation, it just kept going through everything. So let's get into it.
Okay, let's do it, starting right at the beginning.
And the very beginning, based on what we've looked at, it starts with Carl Benz.
That's the man, Carl Benz.
Yeah.
Born back in November 1844, Mannheim, Germany. And his background, it was pretty humble. His father drove locomotives, but he died when Carl was only 2 years old.
Wow, 2? That's incredibly young.
Yeah, it left him and his mother facing, serious financial hardship, a really tough start.
So how did he even get an education?
Well, that's down to his mother. Despite being poor, she was incredibly focused on getting him educated. And it paid off. Carl showed this real brilliance early on, especially with things like chemistry and mechanics.
A natural talent, then. Seems like it. By the time he was just 15, he passed the entrance exam for mechanical engineering at the University of Karlsruhe. 15.
Impressive.
Yeah.
Any key influences there?
Definitely. A professor named Ferdinand Rettenbacher. He was apparently a big deal in German engineering education. And crucially, Rettenbacher believed steam engines, the standard then, were basically on their way out. He was looking ahead.
Towards
horseless carriages. That idea really captured Benz's imagination, especially under Rettenbacher's influence. Plus, Carl was a keen cyclist,
okay.
So he started drawing ideas from bicycle technology. How could you motorize something like that?
So the bike connection was key, not just adapting old steam tech.
Exactly. He felt it needed a totally different approach. Now, apparently, a lot of people just laughed at the whole idea of a horseless carriage.
Right, must have seemed crazy.
But Carl, he was absolutely convinced it was possible. He just needed the opportunity.
So what happened after university? Well, he graduated at 19, spent about 7 years working different engineering jobs. Seems he struggled a bit to, fit in.
Mm-hmm.
But he was learning. And that experience pushed him to start his own thing in 1871. He was 27.
His own business. Risky move. How did it go?
He teamed up with a mechanic, August Ritter. They started an iron foundry and mechanical workshop there in Mannheim. The idea was Carl needed a reliable partner so he could keep working on his passion project, the motorized carriage.
Was Ritter reliable?
No. Not according to the sources. Ritter turned out to be unreliable, and the company just struggled massively in that first year.
Oh, dear.
Yeah, it got so bad. Apparently their tools were actually impounded.
Wow. Close to total failure right at the start.
It was a crisis.
Mm-hmm.
But crucially, around this time, Carl had married Bertha Ringer. Now, she came from a well-off family, and she could see Carl's potential being dragged down by this bad partnership.
Did she get involved?
Big time. She used her own money, her dowry, to buy out Ritter's share completely.
Really? Using her own funds?
Yep. That put her and Carl in total control. And together, working side by side, they somehow managed to turn the business around over the next 10 years or so. Kept it going, despite all the challenges.
So Bertha wasn't just supportive. She was a core business partner from day one. Saved the venture, really.
Absolute fundamental. And it was during these tough years, while they were struggling with the main business, that Carl's real genius in his side projects started to shine.
The experimental stuff. What was he developing?
This is when he came up with a gasoline two-stroke engine back in 1879. And really importantly, he started patenting his inventions. Things we take for granted now.
Like what?
Like an engine speed regulation system, battery ignition, the spark plug, carburetor, clutch, gear shift. even a water radiator.
Wow, so many key components. He wasn't just trying to build a car, he was literally inventing the pieces for the car.
Exactly. These patents weren't just steps towards his dream car. They were also things they could potentially sell, helping stabilize the business that Bertha had rescued.
But it sounds like more business hurdles were coming.
They were. Production costs were rising, and the bank started putting on pressure. They demanded the business incorporate.
Meaning outside investors.
Right. It forced Carl into setting up a joint stock company in 1882 with investors who didn't necessarily share his vision.
That sounds like it could go wrong for an inventor.
And it did.
Yep.
Carl ended up with only 5% of the shares. His role was downgraded. He lost control over design decisions. His ideas were being sidelined.
Oh, that must have stung after all that work.
Deeply frustrating, yeah. Hurtful, too. So much so that he left the corporation the very next year, 1883.
He walked away from his own company.
He did. It was a hard blow, but it seems it just strengthened his resolve to do it his own way.
Didn't give up on the horseless carriage, though.
Not a chance. And remember the bicycle connection.
Yeah.
It came back into play. He partnered up with the owners of a bicycle repair shop in Mannheim, Max Rose and Friedrich Wilhelm.
Another new start.
Third time lucky, maybe. They established Benz Cie. This time, the focus was on industrial machines and, crucially, stationary gas engines. And this venture, it actually started well, became profitable pretty quickly.
Okay, finally some stability.
Right. Steady income, a team of about 25 people. Now Benz could finally really focus on his lifelong obsession, building a practical automobile using his own gas engine design.
And this is where we get the breakthrough, the actual car.
This is it. Carl's fundamental idea was different from others. He wasn't just trying to stick a motor onto an existing carriage. No, he designed the entire vehicle around the motor.
From the ground up.
From the ground up, using those bicycle construction principles. And the result, finished in 1885, is what many consider the very first true automobile, the Benz Patent Motor Wagen.
Okay, paint a picture for us. What did this revolutionary machine look like?
All right, picture this. It's a two-seater, but it only has 3 wheels, wire-spoked wheels, kind of like a big tricycle.
The tricycle car.
Basically, yeah. Powered by a single-cylinder, 4-stroke gasoline engine. It produced, wait for it, 2/3 of a horsepower.
2/3, that's it. What was the top speed?
About 7 miles per hour. Maybe 10 on a good day downhill.
7, you could jog faster.
Pretty much. But it moved under its own power. After tweaking it, he took it out for its first public run in the summer of 1886.
Okay, the big moment. How did people react to this? Noisy tricycle.
Reactions were mixed, definitely mixed. Some people admire the cleverness, sure, but most were just deeply skeptical.
Skeptical how?
Well, some were genuinely afraid it might just, explode. The information we have even says some people thought Benz was the devil driving this infernal machine.
The devil. Wow, that's some serious fear of the new.
Absolutely. And even his own business partners, Rose and Wilhelm, weren't exactly cheering him on. They couldn't see the point. It's no quicker than a horse, they'd say. It'll break down. Where do you even get fuel?
So even the people working with him didn't get it?
It was a lonely vision sometimes. But Carl Benz, he was utterly convinced this was the future. He pushed on and actually started manufacturing cars for sale in 1888, the first person in the world to do so.
The world's first car salesman, in a way.
You could say that. And through all this skepticism, who was his rock? Bertha.
His wife? Again?
Always. She was often in the workshop making suggestions. But still, despite starting production, people just weren't buying it, literally or figuratively.
Why not? What were the early problems?
Well, these first cars could only really manage short distances. You often needed a mechanic nearby. They were incredibly expensive, so only the rich could even think about affording one. Plus, they were loud, messy.
Not exactly convenient.
Not at all. Carl desperately needed something to show the world what his invention could really do.
And this brings us to Bertha Benz stepping up again, right? With what might be the best PR stunt in history.
Oh, absolutely. It's an incredible story. One morning, summer of 1888, Bertha gets up super early. Carl's still asleep. She quietly takes the Patent Motor Wagon, wakes up her 2 teenage sons, and off they go.
Without telling Carl. Or anyone.
Nope. Didn't tell Carl, didn't tell the authorities who probably would have forbidden it anyway. Total secret mission.
Where were they going?
To visit her mother in Pforzheim. Now that's about 106 kilometers or 66 miles away from Mannheim.
66 miles in that thing. Had any car gone that far before?
Nothing even close. This was completely uncharted territory for a motorized vehicle.
What kind of challenges did they run into on a 66-mile trip in 1888?
Oh, loads. The roads were just dirt tracks, dusty, stony, meant for horses. They ran out of fuel and had to stop at a pharmacy in a town called Wiesloch.
A pharmacy?
Yeah, to buy Ligroen. It was a petroleum-based solvent they sold for cleaning, but it worked as fuel. That pharmacy now calls itself the world's first gas station.
Huh. That's brilliant.
And it wasn't just fuel. Bertha had to make repairs herself along the way, unclogging a fuel line with a hat pin, using her garter as insulation material. Stuff like that.
She actually fixed the car on the road. Incredible.
Totally. She was determined. The whole trip took over 12 hours, but they made it. They arrived safely in Pforzheim.
And the impact. Did it work?
It worked spectacularly. It achieved exactly what Bertha wanted. It forced people to see the automobile, to see what it was capable of. The Benz Motor Wagen became the talk of the town, the talk of the country even. Massive publicity for Carl's business.
A real-world demo that changed perceptions overnight. What happened for Benz and Cie after that boost?
Well, with that kind of visibility, the company really started to grow. By 1890, they were actually the second biggest engine maker in Germany.
Mostly from the cars.
No, mainly still from selling those stationary gas engines. They were the reliable moneymaker at first, but the car side was definitely picking up steam.
Helped by new people.
Yes. Crucial new partners came in. Friedrich von Fischer and Julius Gons. They handled the commercial side, the business and marketing stuff. This freed up Carl Benz to just focus purely on the engineering, on inventing.
Back to his passion. What came next technologically?
He kept innovating. Patented things like a planetary gear transmission system, double pivot steering, which made cars much easier to handle, and a flat boxer-style engine configuration.
Foundational stuff for modern cars.
Absolutely. And his partners, they pushed for a new, more refined car design. Yeah. That led to the Benz Victoria in 1893. It was a bit more luxurious, carried 2 passengers, had 3 horsepower, could do about 11 miles per hour, and it sold decently because it was seen as pretty reliable.
Getting better. But was there a real breakthrough model?
There was. Its successor, the Benz Velo. The Velo was simpler, cheaper to produce, and it just hit the mark. It became the world's very first large-scale production car.
Wow. How many did they make?
Around 1,200 units were built. That might not sound like much today, but back then, it made Benz and Cie the largest automobile company in the world during the 1890s and early 1900s.
Incredible. From people thinking he was the devil to leading the world market in, what, less than 10 years?
An amazing turnaround.
Yeah.
But just as Benz was hitting its stride, a serious competitor was starting to make waves, located not too far away. Daimler Motorin Casselshaft.
DMG.
Ah, Daimler. The other big name finally enters the picture.
Exactly. Headed by Gottlieb Daimler and his brilliant chief engineer, Wilhelm Maybach. Both amazing engineers, like Benz. But Daimler, he was known for being highly competitive, very business savvy. Maybe qualities Benz wasn't as focused on.
A different kind of leadership dynamic.
Yeah.
What were their early cars like?
DMG sold its first car commercially in 1892. They had a 2-cylinder model by 94, and then a really key design in 1897, the Daimler Phoenix, which is one of the first successful front-engine cars.
Front engine, like modern cars. Getting closer, yeah. Their vehicles were definitely catching up to Benz, and often people thought they looked a bit more appealing, maybe more comfortable too.
So the race was on?
It really was. Then came a significant event. Gottlieb Daimler passed away in 1900. Wilhelm Maybach effectively took over the engineering direction.
Maybach in charge.
And under his leadership, he created what many see as a true landmark car. The Mercedes 35 horsepower, unveiled in 1901.
Mercedes. Okay, where did that name come from? It wasn't Daimler's name.
No, it came from a key customer, actually. A wealthy Austrian businessman and racing enthusiast named Emil Jelinek. He commissioned DMG to build this powerful new racing car, and he insisted they name it after his young daughter, Mercedes Jelinek.
Named after his daughter. That's quite something. What made this Mercedes 35 HP so special?
It's often called the first modern automobile in terms of its basic layout and appearance. It had a really powerful gasoline engine for the time, a longer, wider body built on a pressed steel chassis designed specifically for it, not adapted from a carriage, and importantly, a low center of gravity.
Making it handle better. And faster.
Much better and much faster. It absolutely dominated early racing events, street races, hill climbs, and its top speed was around 56 miles per hour.
56 in 1901. That's a huge leap from Benz's early speeds.
Massive. It was totally superior to almost anything else on the roads. And that racing success, it brought enormous attention to DMG.
I bet.
So much so that they quickly decided to adopt the Mercedes name for all their vehicles. They started producing new models, both for racing and for the public, under the Mercedes brand. The Mercedes era had well and truly begun.
Okay, so now you've got Benz, still the biggest manufacturer, but facing this huge challenge for Mercedes, which has the fastest, most advanced cars and this really desirable brand name.
Okay.
How did Benz and Cie react?
Well, the success of Mercedes definitely rattled Benz's partners, Fisher and Gons. They wanted an immediate answer, a car to compete head-on.
Makes sense.
But they went about it in a way that caused problems. They actually brought in French designers to create a new, faster model, apparently without getting Carl Benz's proper approval first.
Uh-oh, sidelining the founder again. How did Carl react?
He was furious, really upset. See, Carl Benz personally disliked auto racing. He thought driving should be slow, careful. The whole idea of high-speed competition, the danger, especially on public roads, it horrified him.
That's fascinating given what Mercedes-Benz later became known for in racing.
Right. A real irony there. Anyway, the car that his team developed without his real input, it wasn't a success. It didn't perform well. This was damaging for the Benz company. They went through a bit of a crisis period around 1903, 1904.
More trouble for the Benz brand.
Yeah, and Carl, he was so angry and disappointed with the whole situation, he actually left the company's management again. Though he did stay on the board of directors this time.
He just couldn't stay away entirely, could he?
Seems not. But here's the twist. Despite his personal feelings about racing, the company eventually persuaded him to allow Benz cars to compete seriously. And ironically, just like it launched Mercedes, it was racing success that ultimately rescued the Benz company from that slump.
Racing saved them. What were some of Benz's big wins?
Well, by 1908, they had a powerful 120 horsepower racer. It famously won the grueling St. Petersburg to Moscow race, covering the distance in just 8.5 hours, averaging over 50 miles per hour, which was incredible for the road conditions back then.
That's serious performance and endurance.
But the real monster was the car they built in 1909. The 200 horsepower Blitzen Benz, the Lightning Benz. This thing was an absolute beast. In 1911, down at Daytona Beach, it actually broke the outright world land speed record for any vehicle, plane, train, or car, hitting over 140 miles per hour.
140 in 1911. That's astonishing.
Absolutely mind-blowing for the era. It cemented Benz's reputation right back alongside Daimler's Mercedes brand as a leader in performance and engineering. Both companies were doing well, good sales, strong reputations, right up until World War I started.
So heading into the war, they were giants, fierce rivals, but both at the top of their game.
Pretty much. But that success, that rivalry, it was about to be completely overshadowed. World War I erupts in 1914, and it just changes everything. Huge impact on lives, economies.
And Germany, especially after the war.
Germany faced a terrible economic recession post-WWI. Both Daimler with its Mercedes cars and Benz and Cie struggled enormously just to survive. The market collapsed.
Existential threats for both. How did they manage?
They realized they couldn't keep fighting each other and fight the economy. Survival meant cooperation. So in 1924, these two fierce rivals signed an agreement of mutual interest.
What does that involve?
Basically, they agreed to coordinate things like design, production, purchasing, sales, marketing, pooling resources to save costs. But importantly, they still kept their separate brand identities, Mercedes and Benz.
A strategic alliance born out of desperation, really?
Absolutely. But even that wasn't enough. The German economy just kept getting worse in the mid-1920s. That cooperative agreement only lasted about 2 years before they were essentially forced into a full merger. In June 1926, Daimler Motorin Casselshaft and Benz and Cie merged completely to form the new company, Daimler Benz AG.
And there it is, the name we know today.
That's the moment. The new enterprise then started branding all its vehicles under the combined name, Mercedes-Benz.
Did the merger work out quickly?
It did seem to stabilize things. They launched some very successful and iconic models in the late 1920s, like the big Mercedes-Benz Type 630, and especially the legendary performance models, the S, the SS, and the SSK, supercharged beasts.
Who was designing these? Still Maybach.
Maybach was involved, but another key engineer working on these amazing cars was a name you'll definitely recognize, Ferdinand Porsche.
Porsche. Before he started his own company.
Exactly. He was a top engineer at Daimler Benz during this critical period.
So the merged company found its footing, building on both legacies. What about Carl Benz? Did he see this merger happen?
Yes, he did. Carl Benz remained on the supervisory board of the new Daimler Benz company. He lived long enough to witness the merger and see the continued success of the automobile, the industry he'd essentially created. He must have marveled at how far it had all come from his little patent motor wagon.
A pretty incredible final chapter for him.
It was. He passed away peacefully in April 1929 at the age of 84, just a few years after the creation of Daimler Benz. A truly remarkable life.
His legacy cemented? The company continued to grow after his death.
Yes, it continued to build its reputation, especially as a maker of high-performance luxury cars. But the information we have makes it clear that the next phase of the company's history, while successful in some ways, coincides with an extremely dark period in Germany and the world.
You're talking about the rise of the Nazi Party.
Exactly. Adolf Hitler came to power in Germany in 1933, and he had a very clear agenda. Part of that agenda was to project an image of German superiority, particularly in engineering and technology, onto the world stage.
And cars were a big part of that projection.
A huge part. Hitler saw international motor racing, especially the prestigious Grand Prix circuit, as a perfect propaganda tool. The sources indicate the Nazi government provided very large sums of money, huge subsidies, to Daimler Benz.
And another German company too, right?
Yes, and also to Auto Union, which later evolved into Audi. The goal was clear: ensure German cars utterly dominated international racing.
So the state was directly funding their racing success for political gain.
That's what the information lays out. And dominate they did. From 1934 right up to the start of the war in 1939, the Mercedes-Benz Silver Arrows, cars like the W25 and the incredible W125, just crushed the competition in Grand Prix racing. They were reaching speeds of nearly 200 miles per hour on tracks back then.
It's 200.
In the 1930s.
Unbelievable engineering. But it undeniably served the regime's purpose, showcasing supposed German technological might. The information also points out that Mercedes-Benz became known as Hitler's preferred car brand. High-ranking Nazi officials, Axis leaders, they were often seen in the imposing Mercedes-Benz 770 limousines.
It's a deeply uncomfortable connection, isn't it? This pinnacle of automotive engineering being so closely associated with and funded by such a horrific regime.
It is. And then, of course, came the war itself in 1939.
How did the outbreak of World War II affect Daimler Benz?
It put the company in, as the material says, serious jeopardy. Obviously, the demand for luxury civilian cars just evaporated. Production had to shift dramatically towards the war effort.
Building what? Military vehicles?
Exactly. They started manufacturing military trucks that became their biggest line. Trucks capable of carrying 3 to 6.5 tons, but also engines for aircraft, tanks, even components for submarines. They became a vital part of the German war machine.
So civilian car production just stopped?
Pretty much entirely by 1942. All resources were funneled into armaments and military production.
As the war dragged on and more German men were sent to fight, how did they find enough workers for these factories running flat out?
That became a huge issue. The demand for military production was enormous. Initially, they recruited large numbers of German women into the factories, but according to the material we've reviewed, even that wasn't enough to meet the quotas.
And this is where the story takes its darkest turn, according to the sources.
It is. The information is quite explicit here. To fill the massive labor shortages, especially as the war intensified, Daimler-Benz resorted to using forced labor on a large scale.
The material specifies who these forced laborers were.
Yes, it states they included prisoners of war, civilians who were abducted from countries occupied by Germany, and also detainees brought in from concentration camps.
And where were these people kept?
The sources say they were housed in camps built very close to the factories where they were forced to work.
What do the sources say about the conditions they endured?
The descriptions are grim. They talk about people being forced to work incredibly long hours under immense pressure. Many were housed in barrack-style camps with very poor prison-like environments. Those brought from concentration camps were under the direct supervision of the SS, facing what the material describes as inhumane living conditions.
And the human cost involved.
The material explicitly states that many of these forced laborers died from severe malnutrition, from mistreatment, even from torture within these camps associated with the factories. The scale of this is, well, it's staggering when you look at the figures provided. By 1944, the sources estimate that forced laborers made up almost half, nearly 50% of Daimler-Benz's entire workforce of around 63,000 people.
Almost 30,000 people forced into labor under these conditions. It's vital we acknowledge, as we discuss this complex history, that these are the documented facts presented in the material regarding the company's operations during this specific terrible period. We're reporting what the sources state.
Exactly. The information details these events as part of the company's history during wartime. There's no way to talk about the company's journey without confronting this reality.
So the war finally ends in 1945. Germany is defeated, devastated. What was the immediate aftermath for Daimler Benz?
The company, as the material puts it, took a big hit. Under the post-war Potsdam Agreement, German assets held abroad were confiscated as part of reparations. Daimler-Benz lost all its foreign subsidiaries, branches, everything outside Germany. They essentially had to start over from within Germany itself.
A complete reset, almost.
And internally, they underwent significant restructuring. This included a process of denazification within the company's top management layers. Despite the chaos, they managed to obtain a permit to restart production from the American occupation authorities in 1946.
Were the factories even usable after all the bombing?
Many of their main plants had suffered severe bomb damage. That was a huge challenge. But they did have one key advantage over some German competitors, like BMW or Adler, whose main sites ended up in the Soviet zone and were lost. Daimler-Benz still owned its, albeit heavily damaged, plants in the Western zones.
So a foundation to rebuild on, even if it was damaged. What did they start producing first?
In the immediate post-war years, the focus wasn't on luxury cars. It was on essentials. Ambulances, police patrol vehicles, small delivery vans, mostly based on their pre-war 170V model designs. They also used one plant basically as a repair shop for U.S. Army trucks.
A very different kind of production.
Very different. The return to making passenger cars was slow. In 1947, for instance, they only managed to produce about 1,045 of the 170V passenger models. A tiny number compared to pre-war levels.
Sounds like a long road back.
It was. But here's something remarkable noted in the material. Despite the devastation, the loss of assets, the damaged factories, Daimler-Benz actually managed to turn a profit just 1 year later, in 1948.
Wow, that's incredible resilience. Even after everything, including that dark wartime chapter.
It really speaks to some underlying strength, doesn't it? And that resilience fueled a rapid comeback. By the 1950s, Mercedes-Benz was already starting to regain its international influence. They made a strong return to motorsports.
Picking up that racing heritage again.
Exactly. And they started achieving successful sales around the world once more.
Rebuilding the brand, the business.
And the finances followed. The growth was pretty stunning. By 1954, the material notes, the company had already generated profits exceeding 1 billion Deutschmarks. And over the following decades, as you know, they continued that trajectory, carefully shifting and cultivating their image to become one of the most valuable and prestigious car brands on the planet.
It truly is an unbelievable story when you lay it all out. From Karl Denz, that lone inventor facing down doubters, through decades of groundbreaking innovation, achieving global leadership, then getting entangled in the darkest moments of history and somehow emerging to rebuild and become the symbol it is today.
Absolutely. What stands out is how that initial spark, that relentless drive for innovation you see in figures like Benz and Maybach, can push progress forward in such incredible ways. But it also shows, very starkly, how the path of a major corporation is never isolated. It gets woven into the fabric of its time, the broader historical events, and sometimes that means confronting some deeply uncomfortable truths about its past actions and associations.
Well, thank you for joining us on this exploration of the complex history behind Mercedes-Benz.
And it leaves us with a really interesting question for you, the listener, to think about. Knowing this whole story, the pioneering origins, the innovation, the undeniable involvement in dark historical periods, and the post-war recovery, how should the past of a corporation like this shape how we see it, how we relate to it today? How do we hold those things in view, acknowledging the legacy of achievement while also confronting the challenging, sometimes painful aspects of its history?